The rain had been falling for hours, soft but relentless, like a conversation the sky refused to end. I remember standing at the corner of Ashbury and Fifth, waiting for the light to change, camera in hand, watching the blur of headlights glide across the wet pavement. My days had a rhythm to them, quiet, predictable, almost sterile. Work, home, edit, sleep, repeat. The kind of life where nothing unexpected ever happens. Until one night, it does. That's when I saw him. He was sitting by the crosswalk, his back pressed against a flickering streetlight pole, clothes soaked through, arms wrapped tightly around himself. People passed him like he was invisible. Something about the way he stared at the ground, still, unblinking, hollow, stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was a part of me that still believed I could save something broken, even if I couldn't fix myself. I approached carefully, as if I might scare him away. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, my voice barely rising over the rain. He looked up. His eyes were green, the kind that held too much story in them, like he'd lived a lifetime in the dark. He hesitated before answering. "I just need a minute," he said softly. His voice had the weight of someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. I offered him my umbrella, though I was already drenched. He didn't take it at first, but when our eyes met again, he seemed to surrender, not to me, but to the moment. I don't know why I said it, but I did. "My place is close. You can dry off, maybe get some coffee." He stared at me, uncertain. "You don't even know me." "I know you look like you could use a place to breathe," I replied. There was a pause, a silence between thunderclaps. Then he nodded. We walked in silence through the rain, his steps trailing half a beat behind mine. When we reached my apartment, I tossed him a towel and one of my hoodies. He disappeared into the bathroom, leaving a small puddle where he stood. I made coffee, hands slightly trembling, partly from the cold, partly from the awareness that there was now a stranger in my home. When he came out, he looked softer somehow. The hoodie hung loose on his frame, sleeves too long, but it suited him. He introduced himself quietly. "Julian." "Noah," I replied. "Nice to meet you, under weird circumstances." He smiled faintly, and it changed his whole face. For a brief second, he didn't look lost, just human. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, steam rising between us. He told me he'd been traveling for a job that fell through, that his phone was dead, and that he'd been wandering since morning, trying to figure out what to do next. His words came out in fragments, like he didn't trust them fully. I didn't press for details. Sometimes the truth isn't ready to be spoken yet. The rain eased outside, but neither of us moved. There was a quiet rhythm to the moment. The drip of water from his hair, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft tremor in his voice. Something inside me, something long dormant, stirred. I realized how long it had been since I'd shared silence with another person without needing to fill it. When he finally thanked me for letting him stay, I shrugged it off. "It's no big deal," I said. But it was. The way his eyes softened told me he knew that too. Later that night, while I set up the couch with a blanket and an extra pillow, Julian stood by the window, looking out at the streetlights reflecting off the puddles below. His expression was distant, like he was trying to remember where he belonged. "You can stay a few days if you need," I said quietly. He turned to me, searching my face for something I couldn't name. "You don't even know if I'm worth trusting." I met his gaze. "Maybe not, but everyone deserves one night of safety." He looked away, and for a moment, I thought I saw his eyes glisten in the dim light. He muttered something like, "Thank you," so softly I almost didn't hear it. When I went to my room, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the faint creak of the couch as he shifted, the occasional sigh from the living room. My mind raced with questions. Who was he really? What was he running from? Why did it feel like I already knew him somehow? At some point, curiosity got the better of me. I stepped out quietly and found him asleep on the couch, turned toward the window. The light from the street filtered through the blinds, cutting lines across his face. His expression, even in rest, carried exhaustion and something else, grief, maybe. I stood there for a while just looking. There was something heartbreakingly peaceful about him. The world outside still dripped with rain, but in that small room, time felt suspended. I didn't understand it then, but that night was a turning point. The kind that changes how your life feels without you realizing it. I'd always thought loneliness was a wound, but watching him there, I wondered if it was a doorway instead, one that had just opened, letting someone unexpected in. When I finally went back to bed, I left my door open a crack. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was hope. I couldn't tell anymore. The rain stopped before morning. The silence that followed felt different, heavier, almost meaningful. And as I drifted between waking and sleep, a thought kept echoing in my mind, quiet but certain. I found him and brought him home. That's when everything started. The morning after Julian arrived felt strangely lighter, as if the air itself had shifted. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, cutting across the hardwood floor, and for the first time in months, I didn't wake to silence. I could hear him moving around the kitchen. Soft footsteps, the clink of a cup, the low hum of someone trying not to disturb. It was odd, that simple sound of another person existing near me. It made the apartment feel less like a waiting room and more like a home. When I stepped out, he was standing by the window, holding a mug of coffee I'd left out for him. He smiled when he saw me. "I made toast. Hope that's okay." I nodded, still half asleep. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said simply. "You've done enough already." It was the kind of exchange that shouldn't have meant much, yet it lingered. The way he spoke, gentle, deliberate, made ordinary words sound like promises. Days turned quietly into weeks. He stayed longer than either of us had planned, though neither of us mentioned it. He helped around the place. Cooked sometimes, fixed a leaky faucet I'd been ignoring for months. We began sharing small routines. Morning coffee, grocery runs, watching old movies on my worn-out couch. There was comfort in the rhythm we built together. But beneath it all was a current neither of us wanted to name. Julian would often ask about my photography. He'd watch me edit with genuine curiosity, leaning over my shoulder, eyes tracing the images as if trying to see what I saw. "You capture people like their secrets," he once said. I laughed, maybe because I like secrets more than stories. He smiled but didn't look away. "Then what do you see when you look at me?" The question caught me off guard. I met his eyes, tried to read what was behind them. Someone's still figuring out what kind of story he's in. He didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth twitched, almost like he wanted to. It was moments like that, quiet, suspended, that made it impossible to tell where friendship ended and something else began. There were nights we'd stay up talking until dawn, sharing fragments of our pasts. He told me about growing up near the coast, about losing his parents young, about drifting from one job to another, always moving before anything could root. I listened, unsure how much it was truth and how much was survival. When he asked about me, I kept it simple. I told him about my work, my small circle of friends, the long stretches of solitude I'd grown used to. What I didn't say was how empty those stretches had started to feel since he arrived. One evening, my friend Caleb came over. He'd been trying to check in on me for weeks, curious about the mystery tenant. Caleb was sharp, quick to read people, and not easily convinced. The minute he met Julian, I could feel the tension. "So," Caleb said casually, leaning against the counter, "how long are you staying?" Julian smiled politely. "Just until I sort a few things out." "Sort what out?" Julian hesitated. "Life, I guess." Caleb shot me a look that said more than words could. When Julian stepped out to take a call, Caleb lowered his voice. "You don't even know this guy, Noah. You sure he's not using you?" I frowned. "He's not like that. You said that about Mark, remember?" Caleb's tone softened. "I just don't want you getting hurt again." I wanted to tell him this was different, but I didn't know how to explain what different meant. There was something about Julian that felt real, even in his silence. He wasn't perfect, but he made the space around him softer. After Caleb left, I found Julian on the balcony, smoking quietly. The sky was turning gold over the rooftops. I leaned against the railing beside him. "You okay?" He exhaled, smoke curling between us. "Your friend doesn't like me." "He doesn't know you." He gave a short laugh. "I don't think I know me either." Something in his voice cracked a little on that last word. Without thinking, I reached out, resting a hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. For a few seconds, we just stood there, the city humming beneath us. Then he turned, eyes meeting mine with a look I couldn't decipher. Half gratitude, half something deeper. The space between us felt charged, trembling with all the words neither of us dared to say. I thought he might kiss me, but instead he looked down, murmuring, "You're kind, Noah. You shouldn't be." That night, the distance between our rooms felt heavier than usual. I could hear the faint sound of him moving, pacing maybe, as if trying to untangle thoughts he couldn't share. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that look again, the hesitation, the ache behind it. The next morning, I found a note on the counter. Went for a walk. Be back soon. But he didn't return for hours. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting. When he finally came back, his hair was damp from rain again, and he looked exhausted. "Where'd you go?" I asked, just needed to clear my head. He smiled faintly, but his eyes avoided mine. I wanted to press him, to ask what was wrong, but I didn't. Instead, I made dinner, and he joined me at the table, quieter than usual. Between us, the air felt thicker, heavier with something unspoken. When I handed him a bowl of soup, our fingers brushed. It was a small thing, but it made the world still. His hand lingered for half a second longer than it should have, then pulled away. He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw both longing and fear, like he was standing on the edge of something he wasn't ready to fall into. We didn't speak for the rest of the meal, but when he said goodnight, his voice trembled slightly. I wanted to stop him, to ask what he was running from, but I didn't. Instead, I watched him disappear into the dark hallway, the echo of his footsteps soft against the wooden floor. Later, when I went to bed, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence I'd known before. This one had weight. It had meaning. It was the sound of something forming between two people who didn't know what to call it yet, and maybe didn't have the courage to. And though nothing had been said, I knew something had shifted. The line we'd been walking had blurred, and part of me already knew that whatever we were becoming would change everything that came next. It started with small things. A missing 20 from my wallet, a message on his phone, that vanished the second I walked into the room. The way Julian's eyes shifted when I asked where he'd been all afternoon. None of it meant much on its own, but together, they formed a quiet pattern I couldn't ignore. Something was slipping between us, something I couldn't name, but could feel tightening with each passing day. He'd become distant. He still smiled, still made coffee in the mornings, still asked about my work. But his presence felt rehearsed, as if he were performing a role he no longer believed in. There were moments I'd catch him staring out the window, expression blank, his mind elsewhere. When I asked what he was thinking, he'd just shake his head and say, "Nothing, just tired." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the truth has a way of whispering even through silence. One evening, Caleb called. His voice carried that edge I recognized instantly, part concern, part warning. "Noah, you need to listen to me," he said. "I saw Julian downtown this morning. He wasn't alone." I froze. "What do you mean?" "He was with someone. Some guy. They looked close, like they knew each other well. Maybe a friend," I said, though the words fell hollow even as I spoke them. "Then why did he lie about where he was?" The call ended, but the echo of his words stayed long after. I sat on the couch, staring at the spot Julian, usually occupied, trying to reason with myself. Maybe Caleb was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation. But deep down, I already knew. When Julian came home later that night, his smile was faint, distracted. "Hey!" he said softly, as if nothing was wrong. "Where were you?" I asked. He blinked, surprised by the sharpness in my tone. "Out. I needed some air." "With who?" His lips parted, but no sound came out. That hesitation was all it took. "I saw you," I said quietly. Or rather, Caleb did. His expression shifted. Guilt flickered, then denial. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "I was meeting someone who helped me when I first came here. That's all." "Why hide it, then?" Why lie? He stopped moving. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, he whispered, because I didn't know how to tell you the truth. Something in his tone cracked open the air between us. My chest tightened. What truth? He looked at me then, not with the softness I'd grown used to, but with the heaviness of someone about to break something fragile. When you found me that night, I wasn't just lost. I'd been staying with someone else, someone I was seeing. Things went bad. I left, thinking I could start over. You were kind, Noah, and I... He stopped, eyes glistening. At first, I stayed because I didn't know where else to go. But then I stayed because I didn't want to leave. The words stung more than I expected. So what was I? A shelter? A backup plan? He shook his head violently. No, you were real. Everything with you was real. I swear. Then why hide it? Why let me believe? I couldn't finish. My throat tightened around the words. Julian stepped closer, but I moved back. The room felt too small, too heavy. The warmth that had filled it for weeks now burned like betrayal. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. I just didn't know how to be honest without losing what we had. But you lost it anyway. I whispered. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the space where trust used to live. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man I'd saved, but the man who had quietly undone me. He tried again. Noah, please. I care about you. Maybe more than I should. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe the trembling in his voice meant something pure. But caring and loving aren't the same thing. Caring doesn't erase deceit. I turned away, my voice barely audible. You should go. He didn't move at first. I could feel his eyes on my back, waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, he let out a quiet breath and said, For what it's worth, you made me feel safe. I don't think I ever had that before. The door closed behind him, and the sound was final. I stood there in the silence, my reflection faint in the dark window, the city lights trembling outside like distant stars. For a long time, I stayed frozen. Every memory of him replayed in flashes. The way he smiled while cooking, the quiet nights talking under dim light, the brush of his hand against mine. I realized then that betrayal doesn't always come with cruelty. Sometimes it wears the face of someone who once looked at you like you were home. I walked to the couch where he'd first slept that night, the night everything began. The blanket he'd used was still folded neatly at the edge, like he'd left a part of himself behind. I sat down and pressed my palms against it, trying to feel something that wasn't pain. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady, just like the night I found him. It felt almost poetic, how it all came full circle. Only now, the sound of it didn't soothe me. It reminded me. He came into my life like a storm, beautiful, unexpected, and destructive. And just like a storm, he left without warning, leaving behind silence and a version of me I didn't recognize. I thought I was rescuing him that night, but maybe I was the one who needed saving. Maybe I brought him home because some part of me was already waiting for something to break, just to feel alive again. As the night deepened, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, surrounded by the echoes of his absence. And in that emptiness, I finally understood what it meant to lose something that was never really yours to keep. Yet, beneath the ache, there was something else, something faint but steady, the smallest flicker of understanding that endings, no matter how painful, are sometimes the only way to begin again. Months passed before I realized I'd stopped waiting for him to come back. At first, every knock on the door, every message alert, sent my pulse racing with false hope. But time, in its quiet cruelty, taught me to live without expectation. The apartment felt emptier than before. Not because he was gone, but because the space he'd occupied still carried his absence like a ghost. His laughter had long faded, yet I could still feel it echoing faintly in the walls. I tried filling the silence with noise, music, work, the endless rhythm of my camera shutter. But even in crowded places, I could sense him, like an unfinished sentence hanging at the edge of thought. The ache dulled, eventually, but it never vanished. Love leaves traces, invisible fingerprints on the moments that follow. One evening, I found myself walking to the same intersection where I'd first seen him. The rain had returned, the same silver drizzle, washing the city clean and unfamiliar. I stood there for a long time, watching the lights change, remembering the look in his eyes that night, lost, desperate, yet strangely alive. I wondered if he ever thought about me when it rained. I wondered if he ever felt the weight of what we left unfinished. Life had continued in small, fragile steps. Caleb checked in often, careful not to mention Julian, but always managing to say what I needed to hear. "You're getting better," he said once, over coffee. "You don't talk about him like you're breaking anymore." I didn't answer, but I smiled because he was right. The pain had softened into something bearable, an ache that no longer defined me, only reminded me. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. It was plain, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, uneven, familiar. My chest tightened as I held it, afraid to open it and afraid not to. When I finally unfolded the paper, his words felt both foreign and intimate. "Noah, I replayed that night 1,000 times. The way you looked at me when the truth came out. I don't think I'll ever forget it. You had every reason to hate me, and maybe you still do. But I need you to know I'm sorry. You gave me more kindness than I deserved. You made me believe I could be more than what I was running from. I didn't know how to stay without hurting you, so I left. I've been trying to rebuild since then, piece by piece. I hope you're doing better than I am. You deserve that much. Julian." I read it twice, then a third time. The words blurred, not from tears, but from the realization that I no longer needed them to mean what they once would have. There was a time when that apology would have shattered me. Now it only settled like dust, gentle, inevitable. I didn't write back. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't reopen old wounds. But I kept the letter, folded neatly in the drawer beside my desk. Not as proof of pain, but as a reminder of what I'd survived. In the months that followed, I began taking photographs again, not of people, but of moments. Reflections in puddles, hands reaching for train handles, the quiet stillness of strangers lost in thought. There was something comforting in capturing what existed only for a heartbeat before disappearing. Maybe that's what love had been too, fleeting, beautiful, and never meant to stay. One afternoon, while shooting near the river, I saw a couple standing by the water, laughing under a shared umbrella. Something about the scene made me pause. Their faces glowed in the soft light, unaware of being watched. For the first time, I didn't feel envy. I felt gratitude for having once known what it was like to feel that alive. When I returned home that evening, the apartment didn't feel empty anymore. The quiet wasn't loneliness. It was peace. I made myself coffee, sat by the window, and watched the city fade into dusk. Across the street, someone was playing guitar, a melody so gentle it barely reached me, but enough to remind me that life goes on, even when it's quiet. I thought about Julian then, not as the man who broke me, but as the one who reminded me I could still feel. Maybe that was his purpose in my story, to awaken something I had buried long ago. Some loves aren't meant to last. They're meant to teach. Sometimes I wonder if he ever found what he was looking for. Maybe he's standing in someone else's kitchen now, making coffee, smiling in that half-shy way of his. I hope so, because despite everything, I don't regret finding him. I don't regret bringing him home. Every scar he left behind became a line in the story of who I am now. Someone softer, someone braver, someone who finally understands that love isn't about holding on, but about learning how to let go. The city outside hummed to life as evening settled. Lights flickered in the windows of strangers I'd never meet, and for the first time, I didn't feel apart from it. I lifted my camera and snapped a photo of the street below. The blur of motion, the golden haze of headlights, the pulse of a world still moving forward. I looked at the image on the screen, then whispered to myself, "You like this one, Julian?" The thought didn't hurt. It just existed, quiet and whole. I leaned back, letting the hum of life fill the room, and realized that maybe love doesn't end when people leave. It lingers in the way you look at the world afterward. In the stillness, the color, the echoes. And as the rain began again, soft against the glass, I felt something close to peace. the kind that doesn't demand closure, only understanding. I found him and brought him home. And though he's gone, everything truly did start from there.